Good morning, everybody. I hope we have not lost our good sister Natasha. Sometimes technology is normally disappointing in a way or the other. But once again, Invest Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland Business Kenya. Thank you so much for extending this particular invite to us. We are very humble. We don't take it for granted for you to choose to walk the journey with KEPSA and specifically Global Forensic to discuss this timely topic about cybersecurity. My presentation will be very short. It's just to introduce this concept of cybersecurity and make us understand the cyberspace and its components so that we appreciate the shift from the normal terrain that we are normally accustomed to and what the government of Kenya has tried to its level best to make sure that they do to create a more conducive business environment, just to encourage the corporates to make sure that they take advantage of the structures which have been put by the government. And of course, lastly, to demonstrate that we have some protocols which needs to be implemented by the private community to make sure that the cyberspace within our business environments are safe. Just to start it off is to understand what cyberspace is, and we are being told that cyberspace is a large, amorphous, and a growing terrain. We are all used to the normal terrain where we normally talk about the geophysical terrain, and what we mean by geophysical terrain is that you are normally accustomed to things like land, air, space, and sea. But we are now shifting to the new terrain, which we are calling non-geophysical terrain, which normally composes things like cyberspace, genomics, and the mindset. Our topic today is specifically about cyberspace, which is one of the components of non-geophysical terrain. It is important to realize that most of this particular terrain in terms of usage is normally within the private sector. That is where most of the businesses are normally done nowadays. And COVID has even made it more urgent at the end of the day, because you're talking about working from home, you're talking about automating most of our processes. In the long run, we are creating an avenue for both bad and good people to utilize that particular space. And that one now brings more need of what we are calling the cybersecurity. And I'm happy that we're discussing this with Northern Ireland, one of the countries which have heavily invested in making sure that the cyberspace is safe. For us just to understand it as members of the private sector, first of all, we need to appreciate that we have two major components of cyberspace. One of them is what we are calling the cyber infrastructure, where we are normally accustomed to things like hardware, telecommunication, and anything that normally makes that particular connectivity to be a success at the end of the day. But alongside it, a second component that we need to make sure that we appreciate, which normally brings a lot of dynamics and interest, is what we are calling the cyberspace superstructure. The information, the asset that is flowing between those particular hardware components becomes key to all of us. It is important to appreciate that both the cyber infrastructure, the cyberspace infrastructure, and the cyberspace superstructure are all targets of threats at the end of the day. They're normally targeted by the malicious people. So we need to make sure that we appreciate so that at least together we see how best we can synergize. Putting into consideration that most of these cyberspace activities are within the private sector. So it becomes very, very key to all of us. Then another thing that you need to appreciate is that we have a major vulnerability that normally comes with the cyberspace. The critical infrastructures are highly exposed, they're highly being targeted. The softwares which are controlling those particular connectivity within the cyberspace are also targets. But above all, within where we normally operate as the private sector, we are normally required, as we shall see, to make sure that we equally invest heavily on what we are calling the cybersecurity governance. But this is normally driven by what we are calling the public knowledge and public perception, because most of information or news that we normally hear is all about attacks left, right, center. Banks being one of the major targets when it comes to targeting some of these assets. Still under vulnerability, it's major. It's important to understand that concerns have grown, that what is needed is a national security, cybersecurity framework, a coordinated, coherent set of public and private partnership to make sure that any nation is safe at any given moment. Remember, when I started, I said that most of these activities are normally done on private terrain. What has the government done, and what is the role of the private sector? That is what we need to appreciate. We can't underestimate that, for example, in our republic, the government has tried its level best to make sure that they create an infrastructure which is supposed to be leveraged by the private sector. Like, I believe Kenya is one of the countries in the world which have ended up defining some of these critical terms in their constitution. And that's why there's an extract of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, to be precise, Article 260, when we are defining document, because we had a lot of discussion about what a document entails, whether electronic files include a document. So as a country, we took it upon ourselves and made sure that when you're talking about a document constitutionally, we said it includes electronic file. And that is purposely why we decided to make sure, I decided to make sure that we pick it from that particular angle, that we have a constitutional background which acknowledges all that is taking place within the cyberspace, be it cyber infrastructure, be it cyberspace superstructure. The key thing is any transaction that is being done, it is acknowledged in our constitution in the Republic of Kenya. Apart from that, in 2013, we also came up or amended one of the acts which was in existence in 1997, that is Kenya Information and Communication Amendment Act 2013. It was dated 11th December 2013, and the date of commencement was on 2nd January 2014. The important thing with this act, as we shall see in the next slide, is that actually it gave or it defined cybersecurity in the context of the Kenyan perspective, giving all the stakeholders that particular leeway to see how best we can make sure that we fit into that particular concept and participate as members of the private sector to make sure that our own terrain, within the big terrain, we also make sure that we have safe system. In 2014, equally, as a republic, we also enacted the security amendment laws, which was trying to put some punitive measures to make sure that any transaction that is being done within the cyberspace have the equivalent fine that can act as a deterrence. That particular security amendment laws was ascended in 19th December 2014. Then its commencement date was 22nd December 2014. For those people who are residing in Kenya, you can only remember these particular laws with acrimony when it was being passed during very late hours at night. But it has some clauses which are very relevant to cybersecurity, just to make sure that all the transactions which are being carried out are safe. As if that was not enough, in 2018, as a republic, we also came up with the Computer Misuse and Cybercrime Act, a concept that I personally, through our sector board, that is Kenya Private Sector Alliance Security Sector Board, we conceptualized in 2009. And 2018, it saw the light of the day. So we also have that particular act, which is called Computer Misuse and Cybercrime Acts 2018. It was ascended in 16th May 2018. Then the date of commencement was 30th May 2018. This is just a demonstration that at the national level, the government has tried its level best to make sure that it has a national structure to make sure that the cyberspace within the Republic of Kenya is safe to a certain extent. Then, as if that was not enough, in 2019, the government once again passed what we are calling the Data Protection Act 2019. It was ascended on 8th May 2019, and the commencement date was 25th November 2019. That's just an extra from the few legislative work which has been done by the national government, just to make sure that .ke, the cyberspace reserved for the Republic of Kenya, to a certain extent is safe at the national level. But remember, in my initial slides, I say that most of these transactions are normally done in the private terrain. So the private also has a responsibility to make sure that they take advantage, especially the good partnership which has been extended by our brothers or our colleagues from the Northern Ireland, which have heavily invested in making sure that they come up with the systems and technology which can be utilized to make sure that our cyberspace holistically is safe. The same acts created room for other agencies within the government to make sure that they provided guidelines, especially to the stakeholders. And I can say that, for example, the Central Bank of Kenya, because most of these cyber threats normally target financial institutions, the CBK came up with a guideline on cybersecurity for payment service providers, a very elaborate risk management, a very elaborate guideline, which they normally request or advise the industry players to make sure that they can borrow from it. And of course, build probably policies and procedures which can make that particular sector a bit safe. Still, Central Bank of Kenya came up with risk management guidelines just to make sure that the cyberspace, when financial transactions are being done, are equally safe. Then Kenya Computer Incident Response Team Coordination Center, which you normally abbreviate as the KSAT, also came up with a national cybersecurity strategy just to make sure that they can support the achievement of Vision 2030 of the Republic of Kenya, because information is one of the pillars that is normally anchored on the same. Still at the national level, the government also came up with what we normally call the Kenya Network Information center, KENIC, just to make sure that the .ke and affiliate domain levels try their level best to make sure that the cyberspace is safe. As I had alluded to, the KSAT keeps on giving statistics about threats which normally come in after every quarter. Something that, once again, I applaud the national government that they have provided that particular lead on making sure that they provide data to make sure that the private sector can utilize the same for their strategic objectives at the end of the day. So KSAT normally engages several stakeholders in several forums, including Kenya Cyber Security and Forensic Association, whom we have the chair of that particular association with us, and I happen to be a member. These statistical analyses are normally very key in planning, especially at the corporate level. And this is why, once we have this particular information, it is normally my humble prayer that God has sent Invest Northern Ireland, one of the business associations coming from a country which is leading in providing cybersecurity solutions at the end of the day, so that we don't say that we don't have enough data to assist us make a decision as we proceed at the end of the day. So KSAT have always religiously given their quarterly reports on statistics about threats on different platforms, which we can always utilize. As I said, by the time I was going through the framework, the national framework in terms of legislation, Kenya is one of the countries in Africa which have tried this level best to make sure that they come up and define the concept of cybersecurity. And this is the definition as per the law. So as a country, we don't have any other leeway. We don't have ambiguity on understanding what cybersecurity is. And just for information, is that they're saying it means the collections of tools, policies, security concepts, security safeguard, guidelines, risk management approaches, actions, training, best practices, assurance, technologies that can be used to protect the cyberspace. So it is up to the stakeholders, the private sector, to make sure that we tap into good partnership like the one that is being extended and see how best we can assist the government from the operational point to make our country to be more safer at the end of the day. So in terms of understanding the concept of cybersecurity, we don't have a vacuum as a country. In terms of understanding what a document is, we don't have a vacuum as a country because we included it in the what? We included it in our constitution deliberately. Then what is the gap between managing cybersecurity? We are seeing the gap, despite the government playing its role in formulation of laws and regulations and developing institutions, many observers have expressed concern that corporations and organizations have not developed sufficient responsive governance mechanisms to address cybersecurity needs at the end of the day. So that becomes one of the major challenges. And if you engage most of the industry players, they normally tell you this thing comes with a cost at the end of the day. So in that process of balancing cost-benefit analysis, we end up creating loopholes which can be utilized by the bad boys, the bad girls, to make sure that they infiltrate into our system and do what? And take advantage of our assets which have been installed in those particular aspects. It is clear that the private sector has a very key role to play. And this is why we've been told it is generally advisable that sound cybersecurity involves a focus on three elements. We need to make sure that we partner with the people who will give us the right technology. And once again, I repeat it, thanks God that we are now on a very timely mode when COVID has compelled us to make sure that we go online. Northern Ireland, with all its potential investing and coming up with the products, have extended this invite to us. Within the corporate level, we are saying operations are normally internal to those particular institutions. Are we in a position to make sure that we create enough awareness in terms of training, so that we train the people involved, we create up the processes which will be, to a certain extent, provide the level of security which is needed. And the weakest link in any security is normally the personnel, so that we also work on their attitude at that particular level. The best the government can do is to give us a framework. Then the people who are supposed to make sure that we follow this particular framework and the laws are the individuals serving in the respective corporations at the end of the day. So it is normally advisable that the boards should deliberately include the issue of cybersecurity as the discussion at that particular level. And I'm happy that I've served the boards that have always been that unless we pick that particular conversation of investing on cybersecurity at the board level, it might not be that they have it, and it becomes one of the key performance indicators at the board level if we get to appreciate God particular direction. What are the key aspects of the second last slide? Generally, effective governance for cybersecurity would be expected to involve the following: clear and measurable goals at the corporate level, at the board level. Strategies for achieving these goals. Once again, the responsibility of the board comes, because you can't talk about strategy and you're already dealing with the management. So we are saying among the objectives, they must be very clear and measurable, and we must appreciate that we are going to the cyberspace. We are moving away from the non-geophysical terrain. We are moving away from the geophysical terrain to non-geophysical terrain at the end of the day. Then deliberately, corporate must make sure that they have policies and procedures to implement these particular strategies, because there is no option. That's where we are going to. This would involve not only operations, but personnel management, including the establishment of the appropriate roles, responsibility, and accountability for them throughout the organization as well. The message I'm sending is the national government has tried its level best, came up with the national structures, national laws. The corporate boards should also deliberately discuss and make this one the issue of cybersecurity key if they want to ensure that the private where they operate from is equally safe at the end of the day. As Global Forensic, I'm happy to report that we have participated in developing, reviewing the laws, including cybersecurity laws through KEPSA. And KEPSA is the umbrella body which normally brings all the private players together. The laws are not probably serving the interest of the business community at the end of the day to socially for Vision 2030, and currently working with the corporates to build cybersecurity resilience and the governance as framework. With my experience in leadership and governance, and having served in several boards and still chairing the security sector board of KEPSA, and by default becoming a member of the governing council, I normally try to talk to my colleague at that particular level that we need to make sure that we pick this issue of cybersecurity and make it one of the key discussions at the board levels. Then it will make work easier for other levels of government to make sure that they play a role. Thank you so much, and allow me to return back to Darren.